The letter was duct-taped, yes, duct-taped to my front door. That's how I knew it was going to be one of those days. Not slipped in the mailbox, not mailed, not even a polite knock and drop. Nope, this was taped dead center like a ransom note, with a bright red stamp that screamed urgent HOA notice. I peeled it off, already annoyed, and read the first line. Effective immediately, your monthly HOA fee will increase from $285 to $425 to account for unforeseen budgetary shifts. No explanation, no meeting, just a number and a deadline. I stood there barefoot on my porch, the morning sun already heating the cement under my feet, wondering if I was the only one who got this little surprise. I wasn't. By the time I walked down to the end of the cul-de-sac, 3 neighbors had already gathered under the shade of a magnolia tree, waving their own notices like protest signs. I saw Mrs. Landry clutching hers like it was a court summons. "I'm on a fixed income," she said, voice trembling. "They can't just do this." "They can," came a sharp voice behind us, and there she was, Karrenna Ridgewell, president of the Brookhollow Pines HOA, 49, power walker and self-declared enforcer of order. She always wore a Bluetooth headset even when she wasn't on a call. Her little poodle, Muffin, strutted beside her in a rhinestone harness. Karrenna pointed at me first. "Xayden Zerrick, your lawn was 1 inch over the height limit last week. You want me to pull that citation too?" I stared at her. "You're seriously trying to justify raising our dues by, what, 50% with lawn height?" She didn't even blink. "The board has approved the adjustment. It's non-negotiable." "The board?" I asked. "When was the meeting held?" She wagged a finger. "It was an emergency session, board only. Fully within our rights per clause 32, subsection C." I'd read that clause. It didn't say what she thought it did. That night I opened a beer, sat down with my laptop, and started digging. Not just into the HOA bylaws, but into the HOA budget itself. I'd been a systems analyst before I started working freelance, and numbers always told a story, especially when people were trying to hide one. The HOA website had a password-protected section for board members only. I cracked it in 20 minutes. Karrenna's password was literally Muffin 123. The first thing I noticed, the budget didn't add up, at all. Expenditures for landscaping improvements were listed at over $80,000. But I knew for a fact we hadn't gotten more than some mulch and a few replacement bushes near the pool this year. The invoice listed Green Path Solutions, a company I'd never heard of. I cross-checked it with state business filings. Green Path didn't exist. I dug deeper. Over $30,000 spent on security enhancements. Yet the cameras mounted on the clubhouse hadn't worked in 2 years. A line item for community events, $10,000. We'd had one ice cream truck show up in June, and it left after 45 minutes when Karrenna argued about the permit. Something was seriously wrong. I printed everything. Every invoice, every line item, every suspicious vendor name. I built a spreadsheet, color-coded it, and added footnotes referencing the bylaws. The next day, I called for a special homeowners meeting, citing Bylaw 14. Any resident may call for a vote of no confidence with 30% petition support. I got that in 2 hours. Karrenna showed up to the meeting late, wearing a pantsuit that screamed corporate villain, holding a clipboard and pretending like she hadn't already heard what was coming. "This is highly irregular," she said as she took the makeshift podium, really just a folding table from someone's garage. "You people are not qualified to audit this board." I stepped forward with my binder full of documents. "Maybe not," I said, "but the county auditor is." I handed out copies to every homeowner who showed up, page after page of budget irregularities, fake vendors, misappropriated funds. Even a check written directly to K. Ridgewell Consulting for administrative facilitation services. She tried to snatch the binder from my hands. I didn't let go. "I suggest you sit down," I said, "because the vote's happening whether you like it or not." The vote was unanimous. Karrenna and the rest of the board were officially removed pending a formal audit and legal review, but she didn't go quietly. "You'll regret this," she hissed as she walked off, dragging Muffin behind her like a furry little accomplice. "You don't know what you're doing." She wasn't wrong. Because what I found next in the files made everything worse. A slush fund. Withdrawals from the HOA reserve account that were never documented, and the signature on every one Karrenna Ridgewell. I contacted the County Fraud Division the next morning. Then I called a friend of mine, Yuri, a retired federal investigator who now ran a private consultancy. I gave him everything I had. "You're sitting on a gold mine," he said. "This isn't just mismanagement, this is criminal." Within a week, subpoenas were flying. The HOA's bank accounts were frozen. Karrenna's name was flagged on 4 separate financial irregularity reports, and the best part, she had no idea I was the one who started it. Yet, Yuri's call came just after sunrise. I was still in sweats, halfway through grinding coffee beans when the screen lit up with his name. "They're spooked," he said without waiting for a hello. "Your HOA president tried to close one of the accounts yesterday. Bank flagged it. Now the county wants statements going back 5 years. I set the grinder down and grabbed a pad of sticky notes. 5 years. That's longer than she's been president. Exactly. Which means someone before her might have been in on it too. You just cracked open a nest nobody expected to see daylight." I didn't know whether to feel proud or nauseous. By mid-morning, the neighborhood was buzzing. Word spread fast once the financial review started. A few residents who had always kept their heads down, like Mr. Heller, the guy who spent most of his time restoring classic pinball machines in his garage, were now hunched over folders and laptops. The HOA office, which used to be a ghost town, had a line out the door. I stopped by around noon, just as Casey Tran was pinning a hand-drawn sign to the window that read, "Temporary Oversight Committee Volunteers Welcome." She'd been a quiet presence on the block for years, a pediatric nurse who usually kept to herself. But today she looked like she'd just come out of a courtroom drama, clipboard in hand, glasses perched low, and a kind of focused intensity that made people step aside when she moved. "You helped start this," she said, handing me a laminated badge that read Temp Observer in block letters. "You're part of the team now, whether you like it or not." Inside, the office was chaos. Stacks of old receipts, handwritten maintenance logs, and a box labeled Pool Chemicals 2019 sat in the middle of the floor, half spilled open. 2 teenagers from the neighborhood, twins who just graduated high school, were scanning documents like pros, logging every entry into a shared drive. I headed to the back corner where Yuri had set up a makeshift workstation. He had 3 monitors going, each displaying spreadsheets riddled with flagged entries. "She didn't work alone," he muttered, not looking up. "There's movement on 3 separate accounts tied to the HOA's tax ID. One of them's routing payments to a property in Sarasota." "Guess who's named on the deed?" I leaned in. "No, Karrenna's sister, and it gets better. That property's been listed as a community retreat location on 2 of the annual reports. They've been claiming maintenance and travel expenses for it, but no one's ever been there." "Exactly." He clicked open a file folder. "Also found a vendor called Cleanscape Logistics that billed for weekly trash services along the neighborhood trail. There are 0 trash bins out there, and no one ever remembers seeing a truck." I took a breath and rubbed the bridge of my nose. "How much did they claim for it?" $17,000 over 14 months. That afternoon, I joined 3 others from the new oversight group to visit the trail in question. It ran along the southern edge of the neighborhood, maybe half a mile of overgrown gravel and tree stumps. Not a single trash can, not even a bagged pile of leaves anywhere. Just a few squirrels and a faded wooden sign that said, "Nature Path, enjoy our shared green space." As we walked, Casey gestured toward the brush. "You know what kills me? This place could have been beautiful. A few benches, some lights, maybe a dog bag station. Instead, it's a ghost trail." "There's something else here," I said, crouching by a torn piece of plastic near a twisted metal post. This was a sign mount, torn clean off, Casey frowned. You think someone removed it, or tried to hide what it used to say. Back at the office, we pulled up old maps from the early development plans. Sure enough, the area had once been designated for a community garden project. The HOA had received a grant $25,000 for green space revitalization. Yuri shook his head slowly when he saw the file. That money never went to plants or soil, but it did match a consulting fee paid to a company registered 3 months after the grant was approved, the owner. Former HOA treasurer, she moved to Oregon last year. Casey looked like someone had dropped ice down her collar. We need to bring this to the county fraud team today. They're already compiling charges, Yuri said, but the more we find, the deeper this goes. They'll want everything. We worked late into the night. Neighbors brought food crockpots, takeout, homemade brownies. Kids played tag in the parking lot while their parents pored over files inside. Around midnight, I was reviewing a stack of old emails we'd recovered from a shared HOA account when one subject line caught my eye. Urgent board vote regarding easement redesignation. The message was short, dated 3 years ago. Per our discussion, I've reclassified the west boundary easement to private maintenance zone to avoid permit delays. Let's keep this internal. No need to involve the city planning office. KR, I stood up so fast I knocked over my chair. The west boundary easement ran behind 7 houses on Elmwood Drive, including mine. Reclassifying it without city approval wasn't just shady, it was illegal. Easements are public access agreements. Changing one without filing with the city could lead to fines, lawsuits, or worse. I printed the email and took it to Yuri. He read it once and nodded. This is the kind of thing that gets people barred from holding office. It's clear intent to conceal. The next morning, I booked an appointment with the city planning department. When I showed them the forwarded email, the clerk's eyebrows hit the ceiling. This was never filed, she said, tapping furiously at her keyboard. That easement is still listed as public utility right-of-way. If they altered it, they did so off the books. I gave her the full file. There might be more like it. By the end of the week, the city had opened a parallel investigation. Inspectors showed up to survey the easement, along with 2 officials from the district attorney's office. One of them, a younger guy with a sharp jawline and a quiet confidence, pulled me aside. If this document holds up in court, he said, we're not just talking about mismanagement. We're looking at conspiracy to defraud a municipal department. I didn't say anything, just nodded and handed him a flash drive. Inside the neighborhood, the tide had completely turned. Residents who once blindly paid fees were now attending every public session we held. The oversight committee had tripled in size. Someone even built a website to post daily updates and document progress. And in the middle of it all, Karrenna was nowhere to be found. Her house sat dark. Blinds drawn. Muffin's shrill bark absent for the first time in recent memory. Rumor had it she'd skipped town, possibly gone to Florida. But the bank accounts told a different story. She'd transferred funds in small amounts to a credit union in New Mexico over the course of 6 months. It looked intentional, slow, calculated. The district attorney's office filed charges 10 days later: embezzlement, wire fraud, falsification of public records, and obstruction. Her name hit the news alongside the headline. Local HOA president indicted in major budget scandal. But that wasn't the end, because as we dug deeper, we found something none of us expected: a second set of books. Hidden behind a false bottom in a filing cabinet labeled pool maintenance. Handwritten ledgers, receipts for cash withdrawals, notes in shorthand, and a name we hadn't seen before: Douglas Kearns. The signature on several entries matched the one from a property deed from 7 years ago, an early board member who'd moved out under family circumstances. But Douglas had never really left. He'd been receiving monthly consulting stipends from the HOA under a shell vendor name. And he was still listed as an inactive advisor in the old bylaws, something that had never been updated. We had just uncovered the seed of the corruption one that had sprouted long before Karrenna ever took control, and it wasn't done growing. The courthouse lobby smelled like lemon floor polish and nerves. I stood beneath a flickering fluorescent panel, watching a young clerk wheel a cart overloaded with case files past security. The place had the kind of stale tension only government buildings could hold, like the walls themselves had absorbed decades of quiet power struggles. I wasn't here as a witness yet, just a citizen delivering evidence. But the weight of what I carried felt heavier than the box it came in. Yuri met me at the top of the marble staircase. He wore a navy windbreaker over a button-down and carried a manila folder tucked under his arm like it was wired for explosives. "They already filed an injunction," he said, keeping his voice low. "The judge's clerk expects resistance." Karrenna hired a defense attorney, not cheap either. Guy used to work corporate white-collar. I shifted the cardboard box in my arms. She's planning to fight it, delay it more like. Hope we can't connect the rest of the trail before she cuts a deal or vanishes. We entered the clerk's office and signed over the documents. Receipts, ledgers, the fake vendor files, and the easement reclassification email. They would be added to the formal record pending the preliminary hearing. I handed over the flash drives last, each sealed in tamper-proof bags. "She's not the only one sweating," Yuri added as we left the office. I traced a payment marked equipment rental to a P.O. box in Carson City. Turns out it's linked to a guy who used to head the HOA's infrastructure committee. He moved out 4 years ago, but the payments never stopped. I adjusted my collar. So this wasn't just a one-woman operation, not even close. She's just the last one arrogant enough to keep the lights on. Back at Brookhollow Pines, the transformation was accelerating. The old HOA signage with its faded gold lettering and chipped posts had been removed. In its place, a hand-painted wooden board bearing 3 words Community Oversight Group. Below it, a bulletin board displayed upcoming meeting times, budget updates, and volunteer shifts. A donation jar for legal fund contributions sat on a folding table, already half full. Inside the makeshift office, Casey was reviewing a batch of documents related to the community maintenance contracts. Her expression was grim. "Tell me you've seen this," she said, holding up a worksheet printed on neon green paper. "This vendor Elite Utility Services, they billed us for monthly equipment checks on the storm drains. First of all, we don't have mechanical storm drains. Second, the contact number listed goes to a voicemail in Spanish that says the mailbox is full." I took the sheet from her and scanned it. There's not even a license number, no business registration, no tax ID. I called the county's contractor registry, no such business on file. But guess who signed off on every monthly payment? She handed me a second page. A signature in tight, slanted cursive. D. Kearns Douglas again. Across the room, one of the twins, Riley, I think was cataloging security footage from the clubhouse. We'd managed to get the hard drives restored by a retired city IT guy who lived 2 blocks over. What he found was even more damning. One clip showed Karrenna entering the clubhouse late at night with a duffel bag. She left 20 minutes later with the bag noticeably bulkier. Another showed her meeting with a man near the back exit. No sound, but the handshake and envelope exchange were unmistakable. We handed everything to the DA's office. They didn't need convincing anymore. The case had evolved from isolated fraud to a full-blown conspiracy investigation. By Friday, subpoenas hit 3 more names, all former board members who'd quietly relocated out of state. One of them had been receiving consulting stipends while claiming disability. Another had funneled HOA money into a renovation project on a rental property he owned under a trust. But what nailed it all together wasn't the money. It was the emails. Buried in the recovered server files was a thread between 6 people dated over 2 years ago. The subject line, contingency planning. The tone was casual, but the content was surgical. One message read, "If we rotate the vendor names every 6 months, no one tracks continuity. Just make sure the I's stay clean." Another, "Katakes got the city contact on payroll. He'll flag anything suspicious before it hits the review desk." The last one, "Worst case, we dissolve the board and let the reserves get absorbed by the city. No one sues over mulch and pool water." Yuri rayed through them, jaw tight. They never thought anyone would look. That's how they got lazy. At the next community meeting, every seat was filled. Folding chairs, lawn chairs, a couple of people even sat on coolers. Casey stood at the front with a dry erase board and a spreadsheet projected behind her. I sat beside her, flipping through my notes. "This is where your dues went," she said, pointing to the board. "Not into infrastructure, not into safety, into a network of shell companies and personal kickbacks." Murmurs spread through the crowd. Someone asked what would happen to the fines they'd paid over the last 3 years. Casey nodded to me. "We're working with a pro bono legal team to file a class action restitution claim. If successful, it could mean refunds. But more importantly, it establishes precedent. The city is watching. Other HOAs are watching." A hand shot up in the crowd. "Mr. Heller, the pinball guy. How do we keep this from happening again?" Casey looked around the room. "We change the structure. No more closed-door board votes. All financials posted monthly. Vendor contracts reviewed by a rotating panel of residents. And no one, not me, not him, not anyone gets paid a dime unless it's approved by public vote." The room erupted into applause. Outside, under the newly installed solar-powered lamplights, I stood with Yuri near the sidewalk. He lit a cigarette and offered me one. I shook my head. "You ever think it'd go this far?" I asked him. "Honestly," he exhaled. "I thought we'd find some sloppy accounting, maybe a little skimming, not a coordinated ring laundering community funds." "I guess corruption doesn't always wear a suit," he chuckled. "Sometimes it wears yoga pants and walks a poodle." I looked down the street, past the rows of houses, the porch lights, the kids riding scooters in the fading light. The neighborhood felt different now. Not because the corruption was gone, but because people had seen it, named it, fought it, and come out the other side. And yet, one thing still bothered me. I turned back to Yuri. "What about the city contact, the one in the emails, the guy who flagged reports?" He tapped ash onto the curb. "Still digging. But if he's who I think he is, we're gonna need more than emails. We'll need testimony. We won't get it from Karrenna." "No," he said, "but we might get it from someone she burned." The next day, I called a number I'd been sitting on for weeks, a Florida area code. The voicemail was dry mail and didn't leave a name, so I left a message. "This is in regard to the Brookhollow Pines HOA audit. I think you'll want to talk. What you told the title office doesn't match the invoices we found. Call me." I didn't expect an answer. But 20 minutes later, my phone rang, a man's voice, quiet, nervous, but clear. "I didn't know what she was doing at first," he said. "She told me it was just a tax shelter. I didn't sign anything. You're listed as a vendor." I didn't know she used my name. But I have copies of everything she sent, screenshots, bank statements. I leaned forward, heart pounding. "Can you send them?" He hesitated. "Not over the phone, I'll mail it." "But I want immunity." I looked at the wall where the community calendar now hung, covered in sticky notes and hand-scrawled plans for the neighborhood's first independent vote. Things were changing, fast. "You'll get it," I told him. "But you better send that package soon. Because this is bigger than anyone thought." And I meant it. Because somewhere in the mess of invoices, shell companies, and backroom deals, we'd stumbled onto something more than corruption. We'd found the blueprint. And we weren't the only ones reading it. The package arrived on a Thursday morning, stuffed in a padded envelope that had been hastily scribbled with my name and no return address. It had a Florida postmark, and the flap had been sealed with duct tape that looked like it had been ripped off a moving box. I pulled it open on my kitchen counter, hands steady, heart not. Inside were 2 USB drives, a stack of printed screenshots, and a handwritten note on the back of a diner receipt. The handwriting was uneven, like someone had written it standing up. "She used me." I didn't realize until I got a letter from the IRS. These are copies of everything I have. She sent the payments through an account I never opened. I'm not going down for her. The return signature was just an initial, L. I plugged in the first drive and opened the folder. Dozens of PDF scans, bank statements, contracts, and internal memos. The most damning was a document titled Operating Framework Brookhollow Pines HOA. It wasn't a legal document. It looked like a playbook. Page 1 outlined procedures for maximizing discretionary funds through strategic vendor relationships. Page 2 listed a breakdown of resident compliance opportunities, which included a chart predicting how much revenue could be generated annually from citations alone. There were quotas. There were suggested scripts for escalating non-compliant households. And most chilling of all, there was a line under long-term planning. By year 5, the board should be financially independent of resident dues if model is followed precisely. I called Yuri. "Send it to my secured server," he said after I read him one paragraph. "This isn't just fraud anymore. This is racketeering, and if the DA's office sees it that way, she's going away for a long time." I uploaded everything and watched the progress bar crawl across the screen. When it hit 100%, I leaned back and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the wind was picking up, shaking the oaks lining the street. The neighborhood felt like it was holding its breath. That evening, the oversight committee met at the elementary school cafeteria. The office was too cramped for what we were about to do. Over 40 residents showed up, and we had to borrow folding tables from the janitor's closet. Casey stood at the front, pointing to a large printout of the HOA's old financial flowchart. "We now have proof that the system was built to extract, not maintain," she said. "This wasn't a mistake, it was an engineered siphon." I stepped forward and held up a copy of the playbook. "And we have their blueprint," I added. "Everything from quotas to shell vendors to bribes. It's all here." Murmurs broke out across the room. One man near the back, wearing a city utility badge, raised his hand. "Any indication how long this has been going on?" "Longer than most of us have lived here," I said. "The earliest document we've found so far is dated over 8 years ago." Different names, same methods. A woman near the front clutched a folder marked "Fines Appealed." Her knuckles were white. "What happens to people who paid into this?" she asked. Yuri stepped in. He was wearing a simple zip-up jacket and had a stack of folders under one arm. "If our civil case is successful," he said, "you could be entitled to compensation, but the first priority is the criminal case. We need to make sure these people can't do this again. Not here, not anywhere." A teenager stood up next, tall and awkward in a hoodie with a cracked skateboard logo. He was holding his younger sister's hand. "My mom lost her job last year," he said. "We got fined for trash cans being out too long. She cried for 3 days, said she couldn't pay it and buy groceries." Everyone went quiet. Casey pointed to the whiteboard where the old citation revenue chart was still visible. "They counted on that," she said. "They banked on fear, on people not pushing back." After the meeting, I walked home alone. The wind had died down and the moon was high. Porch lights flickered on one by one as I passed. A few neighbors waved. Some looked away. Not everyone was ready to deal with what had been uncovered. The next morning, the DA filed a motion to expand the indictment. The charges now included mail fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy under the state's organized crime statute. They also added 3 new defendants, former board members. One of them had been living 2 blocks over this entire time, pretending he'd moved out of state. The courtroom was packed the day of the arraignment. Karrenna was brought in wearing a gray pantsuit and a plastic visitor badge clipped to her lapel. She looked pale, tired, but still carried herself like she was waiting for someone to apologize for the inconvenience. Judge Kelly, a no-nonsense woman known for her glare and her gravel-rough voice, read the charges without hesitation. "Do you understand the nature of these charges?" she asked. Karrenna nodded once. "Do you plead guilty or not guilty?" Her lawyer, a stiff-jawed man with a voice like a broken intercom, answered for her. "Not guilty." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. The judge banged her gavel. "Save it for the trial." Outside, reporters cornered us on the courthouse steps. Cameras flashed, microphones crowded under our chins. "How did this happen without anyone noticing?" one asked. "Because they counted on silence," I said. "And they never expected anyone to look behind the curtain." The trial was fast-tracked. The judge made it clear she wasn't going to let it drag out. Evidence piled up in discovery. Bank transfers, surveillance footage, falsified permits. One witness, a former HOA secretary, testified that she'd been threatened with termination when she questioned a vendor invoice with 2 different mailing addresses. "They told me it was a clerical error," she said. But the check had already cleared. The moment that turned everything, though, came when the city planning liaison was called to the stand. His name was Gerald Marks, thin, balding, with a voice that trembled just enough to make every word hang heavy. "I was approached at a charity event," he said. "Karrenna said she needed a favor, just a signature, said it would keep a community program running. I didn't know it involved altering city records." "Did you receive compensation?" the prosecutor asked. He hesitated. "Yes," he said. $5,000 in 2 payments. I regret it." It was over after that. The jury took less than 2 hours to convict. Karrenna was sentenced to 15 years with parole eligibility after 7. The others received lesser sentences, but all of them included restitution orders. The judge didn't mince words. "This was theft dressed as governance," she said. "And you used the trust of your neighbors as a weapon." The HOA board was formally dissolved. The court appointed a temporary trustee to oversee the transition until a new system could be voted in. The community model we drafted was approved unanimously. No more closed sessions. No more unchecked authority. All financial records publicly posted, all votes transparent and binding. On the night of the final meeting, we gathered at the newly renovated park near the trailhead. The same one that had once been earmarked for fake trash services. Now it had benches, solar lights, and a community garden just beginning to sprout. Casey stood beside me, holding a clipboard but smiling for the first time in weeks. "You think it'll last?" I asked. She looked around at the crowd. Neighbors who now knew each other by name, kids playing without looking over their shoulders, laughter instead of whispers. "It will if we make it," she said. Yuri joined us, sipping coffee from a paper cup. He handed me a copy of the final audit report. It was thick, bound in green tape and stamped with the city seal. "Clean slate," he said. "Not many neighborhoods get one." I nodded, flipping to the last page where the restitution clause was printed in bold. Over $200,000 would be returned to residents. We didn't cheer. We didn't need to. We'd already won.